The sun had barely risen over the jagged peaks of the southwestern mountains when the sound of hooves thundered through the dusty canyon. Birds scattered from the trees, and the wind seemed to carry whispers of warning. Among the shadows of the cliffs, a young Apache woman named Nayeli crouched behind a large boulder, her dark eyes scanning the horizon. She had always been quick, careful, and proud, traits that had kept her safe in the wild landscapes of her homeland. But today everything felt different. Danger hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Nayeli had heard stories from her elders of soldiers moving through the land, taking her people as captives, breaking families apart, and chaining them like wild animals. The stories had always seemed distant, almost like tales from another time. But now, as she watched the figures on horseback advancing with practiced precision, the stories became terrifyingly real. Her heart pounded. She clutched a small leather pouch close to her chest. It contained her only keepsakes, a few strands of braided hair from her mother, and a small stone from a sacred place in the mountains. The soldiers came closer. Their boots crushed the dry brush and their shouts echoed through the canyon walls. Nayeli's first instinct was to flee, to vanish into the rocks and the trees where no one could follow. But it was already too late. The soldiers spread out, encircling the canyon as if they had been tracking her for days. Nayeli realized the truth. She was trapped. She drew a deep, steadying breath, trying to calm the storm of fear inside her. Her people had always taught her that fear was dangerous, that it could cloud the mind and weaken the body. She had to think clearly. Suddenly, a soldier spotted her. He pointed, and his voice cut through the quiet canyon like a whip. "There, she's hiding." "Grab her!" Nayeli's eyes widened. She had no weapon, no real means to fight back. Her only option was to run. She bolted from behind the boulder, her feet pounding against the rough ground, kicking up clouds of dust. The soldiers gave chase, their horses thundering behind her. Nayeli ran with every ounce of strength she had, weaving through the narrow paths of the canyon, hoping the rocky terrain would give her an advantage. But the soldiers were fast and relentless. One of them, taller and broader than the others, reached her first. He grabbed her arm with iron strength. Nayeli struggled, kicking and twisting, her voice rising in a desperate cry. "Let me go. I am not yours." The soldier ignored her words. Another soldier came from the side and placed heavy chains on her wrists. The metal bit into her skin, cold and unforgiving. Nayeli gasped, trying to wrench her hands free, but it was useless. The chains clinked with every movement, a sound that felt like the death of her freedom. She looked into the eyes of the men around her, faces she would never forget, hardened by orders and loyalty to a law that did not understand her people. "Please, set me free," she whispered, her voice trembling, almost breaking. Her words seemed small, fragile, and powerless, but they carried the weight of her spirit, the quiet defiance of a life that refused to end in surrender. The soldiers said nothing. They only tightened their grip, treating her as though she were less than human, a wild creature that needed taming. As they led her away from the canyon, Nayeli's mind raced. She thought of her family, her mother, her younger brother, the elders who had taught her the ways of the land. She thought of the wide-open plains where the wind carried freedom, where she could run as far as her legs would take her without anyone restraining her. Now those memories felt distant, almost unreal, replaced by the hard, cold reality of captivity. The journey was long and exhausting. The soldiers forced her to march under the scorching sun, over rocky hills and through dry riverbeds. Every step in the chains reminded her of the freedom she had lost. She stumbled often, her feet blistered and bleeding, but she refused to collapse. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. Nayeli's mind clung to the stories her grandmother had told her as a child. Tales of Apache women who had survived impossible odds, who had outsmarted enemies and reclaimed what was theirs. If they could do it, she could too. As night fell, the soldiers made camp. Nayeli was bound to a post, the chains biting into her wrists, and left with nothing but a thin blanket. She watched the firelight dance across the faces of her captors, feeling both fear and anger. She refused to sleep. Her thoughts swirled with plans, any plan that might give her a chance to escape, to see her people again. Every sound of movement, every shadow in the night, became a potential signal of opportunity. She studied the soldiers, noting who slept lightly, who snored heavily, who might be persuaded or distracted. But despite her determination, fear lingered. She was alone, far from the mountains she knew like the back of her hand, and surrounded by people who saw her only as a prisoner. She whispered again into the darkness, her voice barely audible. "Please, set me free." The words carried no magic, no immediate release, but they reminded her of who she was, a daughter of the land, a woman of courage, a spirit that could not be chained forever. As the fire burned low and the soldiers drifted into sleep, Nayeli closed her eyes for a brief moment. She imagined the mountains, the rivers, the wind in her hair, and for a moment, she felt almost free. Almost. And she vowed that one day, she would return, not as a prisoner but as herself, unbound, unbroken, and unstoppable. The night stretched on. Nayeli's chains clinked softly as she shifted her weight. She was tired, but her resolve only grew stronger. Somewhere in the darkness, freedom waited. Somewhere beyond the horizon, her people were waiting too. And though the path ahead was uncertain and fraught with danger, she would face it with the same courage that had carried her through every challenge of her life. The Apache woman, chained like a wild creature, whispered once more, her words a promise to herself, a declaration of hope. "I will be free. One day I will be free." The sun rose again over the dusty fort where Nayeli was held. The walls were high and unyielding, built of rough stone that reflected the harsh heat of the day. The clink of chains had become a constant sound in her life, a reminder that she was no longer free to roam the mountains she loved. Each morning she awoke to the same routine, a harsh shout from a soldier, the sound of footsteps approaching and the cold metal biting into her wrists as she was moved from one post to another. The first days were the hardest. Nayeli refused to eat the meager rations at first, not because of hunger but out of anger. She refused to show them that she could be broken. She spent her time watching the soldiers carefully, memorizing their routines, noting when they slept, when they walked, when they spoke softly to one another. Every detail was important. Every detail could be a key to survival. Life in the fort was grim. The air was filled with dust and smoke, the smell of unwashed bodies and hard bread. Soldiers laughed harshly, their voices carrying an authority that felt endless. Nayeli learned quickly that any sign of defiance would be met with punishment. Yet she refused to give them the satisfaction of fear in her eyes. She held her head high, her gaze steady, and spoke only when necessary. Despite the cruelty around her, Nayeli's spirit remained alive. She found ways to keep herself strong. She sang softly under her breath, remembering songs her mother had taught her. She traced patterns on the wall with her fingers, imagining the mountains and rivers she had left behind. At night, when the fort was quiet, she whispered stories to herself, stories of her people, of heroes who had survived even the darkest days. Each story reminded her of who she was and where she came from. The other prisoners were a mix of women and children, each with their own stories of capture and loss. Some had already given up hope, their eyes dull and empty. Nayeli felt a quiet anger at their despair but did not judge them. She understood that everyone handled fear differently. She approached them carefully, sharing words of comfort and encouragement. Even in chains, she tried to remind them that courage and spirit could not be taken by force. As weeks turned into months, Nayeli adapted to life in captivity. She learned the rhythms of the fort, the times when the guards were distracted, the weak points in the walls and doors. She discovered that the chains, while heavy, were not permanent. With patience and observation, she began to see ways in which freedom might still be possible. Every day became a lesson in patience, endurance, and strategy. One day, a young soldier noticed her sitting quietly in the corner, tracing patterns on the floor. He paused, watching her for a moment. Unlike the others, he did not laugh at her or call her a wild creature. There was a curiosity in his eyes, a faint spark of respect. Nayeli sensed it immediately. She did not speak to him, but she nodded slightly, acknowledging the moment. It was a small thing, but in that world of chains and fear, small things mattered. The fort itself was isolated, surrounded by rocky hills and desert plains. The soldiers patrolled carefully, but the land beyond was wild and untamed, full of places a person could disappear if they had the courage and skill. Nayeli studied the horizon every day, memorizing the patterns of the wind, the movement of animals, and the location of water sources. She imagined herself running through the desert, free from chains, the sun on her face, and the mountains welcoming her back home. At night, when the fort grew quiet and the soldiers slept, Nayeli's thoughts turned inward. She reflected on her life before capture, her family, her friends, the dances around the fire, the lessons from the elders. She felt grief for the life she had lost, but she also felt strength in remembering it. Those memories became a source of power, a quiet flame that refused to be extinguished. Despite the harsh conditions, Nayeli began to understand the soldiers in small ways. They were not all cruel by nature. Many acted out of orders, out of fear of punishment themselves. She noticed moments of hesitation, small acts of kindness hidden beneath the armor of duty. Nayeli began to study these moments, learning when a glance, a word, or a small movement might be an opportunity for communication or trust. It was a delicate balance. Any mistake could lead to punishment, but understanding the human nature of her captors might provide her a chance at survival. As the weeks passed, Nayeli became more than a prisoner in chains. She became an observer, a strategist, a quiet presence that the soldiers could not fully understand. She listened to their conversations, pieced together their plans, and imagined ways to turn knowledge into advantage. Every day in captivity sharpened her mind, just as every struggle strengthened her body. She learned that freedom might not come quickly, but it could come if she remained patient and smart. Even in the darkest moments, Nayeli never stopped whispering to herself, "I will be free. I will return to my people. I will run through the mountains again." These words became her prayer, her promise, her shield against despair. She refused to be broken, refused to let the chains define her. They could hold her body, but never her spirit. By the time several months had passed, Nayeli had settled into a cautious routine. She ate when necessary, slept lightly, and observed everything around her. The fort became a place of learning, a place where patience was as important as strength. She knew that escape would not be easy. It never was. But she was no longer just a frightened girl captured in the mountains. Nayeli had grown into a survivor, a woman who understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act in spite of it. And so each day she watched, learned, and whispered her promise into the shadows. One day I will be free. One day I will see my mountains again. One day they will not hold me in chains. The days in the fort passed slowly, each blending into the next with the same rhythm of chains, orders, and quiet observation. Nayeli had grown accustomed to the routine, but her spirit refused to dim. She learned to read the soldiers' habits like a book, noticing small details, the way one soldier always polished his boots in the morning, how another kept a locket tucked beneath his shirt, or how the guards exchanged quiet words when they thought no one was listening. Among them was a young soldier named Thomas. Unlike the others, he did not seem hardened by life in the fort. He was polite where others were rough, attentive where others were careless. He noticed Nayeli not with judgment or cruelty, but with curiosity. When she spoke softly in her own language, he sometimes paused, listening quietly, though he did not understand the words. Nayeli in turn noticed him noticing her. She did not trust easily. Trust could be dangerous, but there was something different about Thomas. One afternoon, as the sun blazed overhead and the other soldiers relaxed in the shade, Thomas approached her. He carried a small piece of bread, crusty and plain, and offered it silently. Nayeli looked at it, then at him, wary. She had learned long ago not to accept favors without thinking, for kindness could be a trap. But this was different. His hands were steady, his eyes calm. Slowly, she took the bread, nodding once in silent acknowledgement. From that day, small acts of kindness began. Thomas would leave extra water when he could, or quietly cover her with a thin blanket when the nights were cold. He never spoke loudly, never drew attention to himself, but his gestures were deliberate. Nayeli began to see him not as a soldier, but as a human being who recognized her dignity. She began to speak more cautiously at first, telling stories of the mountains, the rivers, and the winds that carried the scent of her homeland. Thomas listened without interruption, absorbing every word. Nayeli realized that these moments, though brief and small, were precious. In a place designed to crush the spirit, they were proof that humanity still existed, even among those who were supposed to be her captors. She began to pay closer attention to him, learning which moments of the day were safest to speak, how to communicate without words when necessary. She found herself relying on these connections as much as she relied on her strength and cleverness. One evening, as the sky turned shades of pink and orange, Nayeli spoke more openly than she had in months. She told Thomas about the ceremonies of her people, the dances around the fire, the songs that celebrated the wind and the sun. She spoke of her mother's teachings, of the lessons her elders had passed down, and of the mountains that had been her playground since childhood. Thomas did not speak much in return, but he nodded, his eyes reflecting understanding and respect. The other soldiers noticed these small changes between them. Some frowned, suspicious of the growing connection. Others ignored it, thinking it harmless. Naomi remained careful. She knew that trust could be dangerous if misplaced, but in Thomas she found something rare, a glimmer of hope, a reminder that not all humans were cruel or blind to the worth of others. Over time, Thomas became her silent ally. When guards were inattentive, he would create small distractions, allowing Naomi moments of freedom to move, stretch, or observe her surroundings. When harsh words were directed at her, he would intervene subtly, redirecting attention or offering a word of calm that softened the severity of punishment. Naomi began to understand that freedom might not only come from escape but also from finding allies even in unexpected places. Naomi also began to notice the soldiers' weaknesses, patterns she could use later. Thomas helped without realizing by giving her insight into human behavior. She observed which soldiers were easily distracted, who followed orders blindly, and who showed moments of hesitation or doubt. Each observation was stored carefully in her mind, like pieces of a puzzle she was slowly assembling. She imagined the day when these pieces would fit together, opening a path to freedom. Despite these small moments of hope, life remained harsh. Naomi was still chained, still forced to obey orders, still living under the watchful eyes of those who saw her only as a captive. Nights were long and cold, and the chains were heavy and unrelenting. Hunger came often, and the desert winds carried a bitterness that seemed to seep into every corner of the fort. Yet even in the midst of suffering, Naomi found strength in remembering the kindness she had received, and in imagining the day she would be free. One particularly quiet night, Thomas approached her again. He did not speak at first. Instead, he placed a small smooth stone in her hand, a stone from the river nearby, shaped by water over many years. Naomi turned it over, feeling the cool smoothness against her skin. "For luck," he whispered quietly, barely audible over the wind. She understood the meaning. It was not just a gesture. It was a symbol of trust, hope, and the possibility that freedom might be within reach. From that moment, Naomi felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was not alone in her struggle. She had allies, even if few, and she had her own strength to rely on. She began to plan more carefully, thinking of ways to test the limits of her chains, to learn the weaknesses of her captors, and to prepare for the moment when escape would become possible. Every act of kindness, every shared glance became a thread in the web of hope she was weaving for herself. The fort had become a place of learning, observation, and patience. Naomi understood that survival was not only about physical strength, but also about understanding human nature, timing, and trust. The chains could hold her body, but they could not hold her mind. Every day she whispered her promise to herself: "I will be free. I will return to my people. I will run through the mountains again." And even as she spoke the words quietly into the night, she knew that freedom would come not through luck alone, but through courage, careful planning, and the small acts of humanity that reminded her of the goodness still present in the world. Naomi's spirit remained unbroken, her resolve stronger than ever as she waited for the day when chains would fall and the mountains would welcome her back home. The sun had barely touched the horizon when Naomi began to stir. Her chains rattled softly as she stretched, careful not to wake the guards. Months of observation and patience had led to this moment. She had memorized the soldiers' routines, the layout of the fort, and the times when the gates were least watched. Tonight she would try to reclaim her freedom. Her heart raced not with fear but with determination. She had grown strong in captivity, learning patience, observation, and endurance. The young soldier Thomas had given her small hints, unknowingly helping her understand human behavior and weaknesses. She thought of him briefly, thankful for his kindness, but she knew she could not rely entirely on anyone. This was her journey, her moment. Carefully, she shifted her chains, testing their weight and the lock. She had watched the guards repeatedly and had seen one small flaw. The lock on her wrist was old and slightly loose. Months of quietly working her fingers at it, mimicking the movement of her ancestors threading small tools through materials, had left her prepared. With a soft click, the lock gave way. She held her breath, her hands free at last. Freedom felt heavy and light at the same time, a strange mix of power and vulnerability. Naomi crouched low, moving silently along the walls of the fort. She avoided the main pathways and slipped through shadows. The night was still, the moon barely rising above the desert horizon. Each step was measured, careful but confident. Her eyes scanned for guards, torches, and the patrol dogs she had observed so carefully over the months. Every sound, every movement could mean capture or survival. Hours seemed to stretch as she moved through the empty fort. Her legs were strong from months of hardship, her mind sharp from careful study. She remembered the river, the rocks, the small path leading into the mountains beyond the fort. That path would lead her to safety, to freedom, to the land that was hers by birth. Suddenly, a faint sound of movement made her freeze. One of the soldiers had left his post unaware of her presence. Nayeli pressed against the wall, holding her breath, letting the moment stretch. The soldier walked past, muttering to himself. Her heart slowed only slightly, and then she moved again, faster now, more careful. Each step brought her closer to the gate, to the path she had envisioned in her mind countless times. Reaching the edge of the fort, Nayeli faced the final barrier, the main gate. Her chest tightened. The gate was large and heavy, and the guards often walked nearby. But tonight they were distracted, busy with a small argument about a lost horse. Nayeli saw her chance. She waited, counting each second in her head, then slipped past the gate, keeping close to the shadows. Once outside, the open desert stretched before her. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and distant mountains, the smell of home. Her legs carried her over rocks and dry riverbeds, her heart pounding with exhilaration. She did not stop to look back. Every step forward was a step toward freedom, toward life she had dreamed of while chained and watched. The desert was harsh, the wind biting at her skin, the ground uneven beneath her feet. But Nayeli welcomed it. She had survived harsh conditions before, and each challenge only strengthened her resolve. She thought of her family, her people, and the mountains that had been her sanctuary. She whispered to herself, "I am coming home. I am free." Hours passed as she ran through the darkness, guided by the stars and her memory of the land. Hunger and exhaustion threatened to slow her, but she pushed onward. Her body ached, her feet were blistered, but her spirit was unstoppable. Nayeli had survived months in chains. She could survive this journey to freedom. Eventually, the first light of dawn touched the mountains. Nayeli paused, crouched behind a large boulder, looking at the terrain ahead. The mountains rose like guardians, their peaks welcoming her. Relief and joy filled her, but she did not celebrate yet. She knew danger could still follow. Soldiers might have discovered her absence, and the desert offered no protection from determined pursuers. She needed to move carefully. As she continued, she remembered Thomas, the young soldier who had shown her kindness. She hoped he would understand her need to escape, even if it meant leaving him behind. His help had been subtle but important, and she carried gratitude in her heart. She realized that acts of kindness, even in the darkest places, could make a difference. It gave her hope that humans could be more than captors or enemies. Some could be allies. Some could see the spirit that refused to be broken. Hours later, she reached a small stream, the water cold and refreshing. She drank quickly, her throat parched from the long night of running. The mountains were closer now, the path narrower and more difficult, but she welcomed the challenge. Each step brought her nearer to the freedom she had dreamed of, nearer to the life she had lost but would now reclaim. Finally, as the sun rose high, Nayeli climbed a ridge and looked down at the valley below. Her people's land stretched out in a patchwork of rivers, forests, and plains. Tears filled her eyes, but they were tears of joy. She had survived the fort, the chains, the desert, and now she was home. The journey had been long, painful, and dangerous, but her courage and determination had carried her through. Nayeli took a deep breath, feeling the wind in her hair, the sun on her face, and the freedom beneath her feet. She had done what she had dreamed of for months. She was alive, unbroken, and free. And though the path ahead to her family and tribe might still have challenges, she knew she could face them. She had proven to herself that chains could not hold the spirit, that hope and courage were stronger than fear. And so, the Apache woman, once chained like a wild creature, now moved swiftly and silently toward her mountains, each step a triumph, each breath a declaration. She was free, and she would never be caged again. The mountains loomed larger with every step, their peaks catching the first golden light of morning. Nayeli's body ached from the long night of running, but she barely noticed. Her heart was too full of relief, hope, and determination. The chains that had bound her in the fort were far behind now, lying useless against the strength of her spirit. With each step, she felt herself returning to the land she had known since childhood, the land that had shaped her, taught her, and now welcomed her back. She paused briefly by a small stream, the water clear and cold. She knelt and drank deeply, letting the liquid wash away the dust, sweat, and fatigue of her escape. Her reflection in the water startled her. The face looking back was both familiar and new, tired yet bright with life, scared yet filled with courage. Naeli touched her own cheeks as if to prove to herself that she was real, that she had survived, and that freedom was not a dream but a tangible reality. The journey was not yet over. Though she had escaped the fort, she was still miles from her village. The desert plains stretched out before her, and she knew she had to remain alert. Soldiers might still be searching for her. Her mind raced, recalling the skills and lessons her elders had taught her, the signs of danger in the wind, the way animals sensed approaching threats, the paths that could hide her from human eyes. Naeli moved carefully, using the landscape to her advantage, slipping from shadow to shadow, climbing rocks and crossing dry riverbeds. As the day passed, memories of her people filled her thoughts. She remembered her mother's gentle hands guiding her, her brother's laughter echoing through the hills, and the elders' stories of courage, wisdom, and survival. These memories strengthened her resolve. She whispered softly to herself, "I am coming home. I will see my people again. I am free." Her voice carried no fear, only a quiet determination that had grown stronger through months of captivity and struggle. By late afternoon, the trees of her village appeared in the distance. Naeli's heart leaped. She quickened her pace, careful not to make noise but unable to contain her excitement. She scanned the surroundings, making sure no soldiers lurked nearby. Every instinct she had learned in the fort and in the wild guided her. She had survived countless challenges before, and now she was about to face the final one, reuniting with her people. When she finally reached the outskirts of the village, Naeli slowed. She did not rush in blindly. She observed the familiar faces, the huts, and the fires. Her people were there, unaware of how close freedom had been. She saw her mother first, tending to a small garden, her posture tired but familiar. Naeli's heart swelled with emotion. She wanted to run, to throw herself into her mother's arms, but she waited a moment, letting the sight sink in. This was real. She was home. With cautious steps, she approached the village. Her mother noticed her first, eyes widening in recognition and disbelief. Naeli broke into a run, and the two embraced, tears mingling with laughter. Her mother's hands trembled as she held her daughter, feeling the strength and life that had returned. Naeli's brother ran to join them, his face lighting up with joy at seeing his sister alive. The village erupted in whispers and exclamations, all filled with wonder and relief. Naeli's return was a miracle in their eyes, a testament to her courage and perseverance. As the evening sun dipped behind the mountains, Naeli sat with her family, recounting her journey carefully, choosing words that would explain her captivity without causing fear. She told them of the fort, the chains, and the harsh conditions she had endured. But she also spoke of hope, resilience, and the small acts of kindness she had encountered along the way. Her people listened in awe, their respect for her courage growing with every word. Naeli realized that her survival was not only about escaping, but also about maintaining her spirit. Dignity and wisdom through every hardship. Thoughts of Thomas, the young soldier who had helped her in small ways, filled her mind. She wondered if he would ever know that his kindness had mattered so much, that it had given her strength and hope when despair threatened to overwhelm her. Naeli understood that acts of humanity, no matter how small, could make a powerful difference. They could ignite courage, inspire resilience, and even change the course of a life. Night fell, and the village gathered around the fire. Naeli stared into the flames, reflecting on everything she had endured. The chains, the fear, the harsh journey, all were behind her now. She felt the wind of the mountains on her face, the earth beneath her feet, and the love of her family surrounding her. Freedom was more than the absence of chains. It was the ability to move, to think, to feel, and to live fully. Naeli had regained that freedom, and it filled her with a quiet, unshakable joy. In the stillness of the night, Naeli whispered once more, her words carrying both a promise and a celebration. "I am free. I am alive. I am home. The mountains seemed to echo her words. The river mirrored her spirit, and the stars above twinkled as if acknowledging her courage. She had survived captivity, endured hardship, and reclaimed her life. She had proven that even in the darkest places, the human spirit could not be chained. The Apache woman, who had once been chained like a wild creature, was now standing tall among her people. She laughed, cried, and shared stories, her voice carrying strength and wisdom. She had returned not only to her family but also to herself, a woman unbroken, resilient, and fully alive. And as she lay down that night, the mountains surrounding her like guardians, Naeli felt a peace she had never known in captivity. She had faced the impossible, survived the harshest trials, and emerged triumphant. Her journey had changed her. But it had also affirmed something eternal. That courage, hope, and the human spirit were stronger than any chains. Naeli closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of home and the freedom she had fought so hard to reclaim. The world was vast, full of challenges, but also full of possibility, and she was ready for whatever came next, knowing that no chain could ever hold her again.